This is about NOSTRA REGOLA, or Unravelling the Poetry of Song. The aim of this description is to set down in words the method of singing elaborated, practiced, and taught by Platon Shvets, singer, painter, sculptor, poet, and thinker, born in 1938, died in 2021. To begin at the beginning. The year, 1980. The venue, a back room in St. Paul's within the walls, the Episcopalian church on Rome's Via Nazionale. I sit at the piano ready to begin rehearsing with Platon. In front of me, the score of Rachmaninoff's Здесь хорошо. Here all is well. This lovely song was new to me. Although most of the piano writing is sumptuous, the opening measures are simple, as we can hear in this recording. Even a beginner can play this, right? I start to play the first phrase. Platon very politely stops me and asks me to play it again, but this time, quote, to start from nothing and play the first chord almost inaudibly, then the first part faster than the actual tempo marking, all very even and legato, but with a crescendo and allargando until the end of the phrase. Unquote. What? It was like asking me to say something in Mandarin. How can you even dream of playing something inaudibly? I'd worked all my life to be able to play all the notes, and now I was being asked not to. Just to bring home the foreignness of this approach, let me go back 5 years from that first rehearsal. I arrived in Florence in 1975 on a Queen Elizabeth II Arts Council scholarship for postgraduate studies in piano all the way from New Zealand. My piano teacher at Villa Schifanoia in Florence was the renowned Neapolitan piano pedagogue Vincenzo Vitale, 1908 to 1984, who produced a bevy of extremely well-equipped pianists. The technical skills he imparted to his students ensured not only total ease in playing, but also prevented serious professional pathologies such as tendinitis and focal hand dystonia, the dreaded musician's cramp, which can affect pianists with a schooling that ignores certain physiological principles. I'd just begun to absorb and apply this way of thinking, so new to me, when the irascible maestro fell out with the American nuns who ran the student program at the villa. What a shame. What was I going to do? Here I was, thousands of miles away from home, with a scholarship but no teacher. I decided I wouldn't give up just as I was starting to delve into a technique which was bringing my piano playing up to new heights. I'd found an anchor, a new sense of security and mastery. Plus, I now had the tools needed for solving almost any technical problem. So I simply followed Vitale to Rome, where I enrolled at the Santa Cecilia postgraduate course where he taught. I studied for another 2 years with the same maestro, and I was on the brink of gaining my diploma from this august institution when again Vitale had words with the director. Vitale's volcanic nature was like the unpredictable Vesuvius, whose majestic silhouette could be enjoyed from the balcony of the 6th-floor apartment across the Bay of Naples where he lived. No one was spared his outpourings of wrath. We all shook and trembled before him. What a contrast, a highly charged emotional personality, and yet teachings that were objective and rational. So, after more travails of every kind, pianistic, emotional, and bureaucratic, I graduated from Naples' prestigious Conservatorio San Pietro Maiella, the oldest in the world, with the prize for Best Diploma of the Year. This rigorous approach to piano technique and music making instilled in all his students was Vitali's trademark. The heading of a newspaper interview given in 1979 says it all. Per una nota sbagliata faccio una tragedia. We often heard him roar this phrase in his cavernous Neapolitan accent. Roughly translated, it means, one wrong note and I see red. Every single note had to be there. And now, after all this, I was being asked by Platon to play the first chord silently. Più piano, per favore, insisted Platon. But if I play this first chord any softer, it won't sound at all. Bene, good, said Platon. It's important to start playing from the second note and then build the rest of the phrase on that. Then grow until the very end. I tried again, and we eventually went through the entire song, only 2 pages long, but without my ever grasping this way of organizing the phrasing. Several times I even reached the end before Platon. That at least added a little humor to our otherwise earnest first sessions. Playing Rachmaninoff's late romantic outpourings on one's own requires skills that are acquired with experience. Accompanying this very free and flexible music in an even freer and more flexible manner was impossible at that point of my musical training. In time, however, with much experimenting and searching and many moments of frustration and despair, I was to absorb this way of playing and singing and appreciate the same life-giving force of its dynamicity which informed Platon's artwork as well as his singing. What I've recounted so far is just the prelude to a description of the method devised by Platon over the years. This is not a musicological treatise. On the contrary, what I'm setting out to explain is the system born out of a series of observations made at a time when the art of singing had already undergone a number of metamorphoses, leading to a way of performing far removed from the original spirit of bel canto. It's actually the story of the evolution of a system culminating in the creation of a template to be applied to the performance of poetry set to music, from authentic folk song through to lieder and art song and opera, and consequently to instrumental performance. Platon Shvets named this system NOSTRA REGOLA, and we'll see why later on. Platon had just emigrated from the Soviet Union and ended up in Rome to study with Tito Gobbi, Italy's most celebrated baritone of the post-war era. How did he end up studying with Tito Gobbi? Well, having finally received permission to leave the USSR, and thereby hangs another tale, Platon was granted political asylum in Munich. Soon after that, he made his way to Milan to begin doing the rounds of auditions with agents and opera houses. He'd spent the night at the central train station because he simply couldn't afford the luxury of a hotel room. Looking and feeling disheveled, he walked into a cafe and ordered a cappuccino and brioche at the counter. A few feet away stood a couple who were conversing in Russian. They were none other than Mstislav Rostropovich, one of the world's greatest cellists, and a celebrated conductor who often accompanied his wife, soprano Galina Vishnevskaya, at the piano. Platon blinked. He couldn't believe his eyes. The couple stared back. Just 2 years before, while in Paris, Rostropovich and his wife had been stripped of Soviet citizenship because of their public opposition to the Soviet Union's cultural restrictions. Naturally, they were wary of this man, with his clearly Russian features staring at them. At a certain point, though, the great cellist stepped forward. "Are you Russian?" To which Platon responded, "Da," and quickly introduced himself. "Ah, we know you. Our 2 daughters grew up on your illustrated books of fairy tales." To this day, Platon is remembered in Russia by enough people to have warranted a recent reprinting of some of his illustrated books of fairy tales, first published in the 1960s and through to the mid-70s. Platon asked if he might sing for the great musician who was in Milan to conduct at La Scala that very week. Slava, as he was known to friends, ushered him into the sanctum sanctorum and sat down at the piano, accompanying from memory most of the aria Platon had chosen to sing for him. It was the cavatina from Rachmaninoff's opera Aleko.
Чарующие очи, от чудных прядей мне очи, устал сенсиры.
Ah, bravo, wonderful voice. You must study with a great Italian singer. Let me see. Yes, with Tito Gobbi. I'll write you a letter of recommendation. But, Maestro, I have no money. How will I move to Rome, survive there, pay for lessons? In his typically expansive manner, Rostropovich said, no problem, and wrote out a check for 500,000 Italian lira. Platon was delirious. He really thought he'd struck it rich. Foreigners arriving in Italy during the last 3 decades of the 20th century were overwhelmed by the many zeros involved in the monetary system, which included the existence of 100 lira coin. A coin worth that much sounded absurd. It was the cost of a bus ride in Rome in those days. But, Maestro, how will I ever repay you? Asked Platon. Oh, don't worry. When I'm old and feeble, you can pay for my medical expenses, he said with a wink. Since Slava and Galina were millionaires who would certainly never need assistance from anybody, it was a charming way of saying, don't worry, we're quits. Armed now with this letter of recommendation, Platon arrived in Rome to begin lessons with the great man. Let's listen to his colourful interpretations in excerpts from just 2 of his most famous roles. First as the witty, conniving Figaro in Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia, and then as the evil Baron Scarpia from Puccini's Tosca.
Della città larga, presta bottega che l'alba è già presto, ah, che bel vivere, che bel piacere, per un barbiere è di qualità, di qualità. Oh, bravo Figaro, bravo, bravissimo, bravo! Fortunatissimo per verità, bravo! Fortunatissimo per verità, fortunatissimo per verità, la 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 la, la 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 la. Pronto per tutto, la notte e il giorno, sempre d'intorno finché non sta, miglior cucagna per un barbiere, vita più nobile non lo si dà. Raso gli effetti, lancio dei farmici, al mio comando tutto qui sta. Raso gli effetti, lancio dei farmici, al mio comando tutto qui sta. Vera risorsa poi del mestiere con la donnetta, col cavaliere, con la donnetta, col cavaliere, e di qualità. Tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, donne e ragazzi, vecchie fanciulle, con la parrucca, presto la barba, buono sanguigno, presto il biglietto, tutti mi chiedono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi vogliono, tutti mi vogliono, con la parrucca, presto la barba, presto il biglietto, e Figaro, 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 Figaro. Ahimè, ahimè, che voglia, ahimè, che folla, uno alla volta, per carità, per carità, per carità, uno alla volta, uno alla volta, uno alla volta, per carità. Figaro, son qua, ehi, Figaro, son qua, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro qua, Figaro là, Figaro su, Figaro giù, Figaro su, Figaro giù. Sono prontissimo, sono come il fulmine, sono le facoltà, sono nella città, della città, della città, della città, della città. Ah, bravo Figaro, bravo bravissimo, ah, bravo Figaro, bravo bravissimo, fortunatissimo, 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 per verità. Hatte fortuna, non mancherà. Sono il fantasma della città, sono il fantasma della città, della città. Della
Sbirri, una carrozza, presto, seguilo dunque vada, non visto, provvedi.
Sta bene, il convegno.
Palazzo Farnese. Quanto sta nel tuo car Sannedo Scarpia? Quanto sta
Both these recordings feature Maria Callas as the co-protagonist. Their partnership was legendary. Well, it was soon after his arrival in Rome that Platon and I were introduced. It so happened that Yuri Olshansky, whom I'd met briefly at a New Year's party, caught sight of me as we sat waiting for a concert to begin in a theatre on the outskirts of Rome that March of 1980. After presenting us to one another, Yuri said, "Oh, you must give some concerts together." Actually, it was a strange series of coincidences that led up to this meeting of all three of us. Yuri is an actor, mime, stage director and author, and, importantly for this story, was at the time an avid fan of opera singing of the past. Both Platon and Yuri hailed from St. Petersburg, or Leningrad as it was known at the time, but had met there only fleetingly. It was during a vacation in Crimea that Yuri accidentally encountered Platon again. And what an encounter! There was Yuri soaking up the sun on a sandy beach when he saw a man emerging from the waves, singing his head off. Now, despite Yuri's fondness for opera, his experience of opera singing was another matter. He had always admired Shaliapin, Caruso, Gallicurci, Nezhdanova, and the old league of singers, but the fashion that grew to prevail in the 1960s and 70s, on the whole, and with rare exceptions, of course, overwrought, too loud, the words were difficult to follow, mostly based on an unnatural method of voice production, singers now aiming at slaying the masses. All this had alienated Yuri and many others from the world of opera. I myself enjoyed modern-day recordings and live performances too of opera and lieder, but mainly because I was entranced by the music and the overall spectacle, the splendor and theatricality of it all. Back home, I'd accumulated willy-nilly a collection of 78s and some LPs of the greats of yesteryear. In the singing department, I was more than familiar with Caruso, Melba, Shaliapin, Gigli, Gallicurci, and with the world of instrumentalists like Fritz Kreisler, Misha Elman, Rachmaninoff, Moisevich, Paderewski, etc., etc. I admired contemporary performance, but I worshipped the stars of the past. In Yuri's case, his first meeting with Platon knocked the spots off the leopard. His powerful voice was at the same time very personal in timbre. The words were not only clear, but were woven into the melodic line with the skill of an actor practiced in the art of declamation. Here it was, recitar cantando, where voice and music flowed as one. After that meeting, they each went their separate ways, only for their paths to cross again in Rome in 1978. after they'd emigrated to the West. Even in this case, their meeting had an almost unexplainable aura of destiny about it. Valery, a Russian pianist who was well ensconced in the capital and who often lent a helping hand to newly arrived Russian musicians and artists, asked Yuri to go to Termini station to meet a Russian baritone who spoke no Italian, and to escort him to a lesson with Tito Gobbi. Platon spoke virtually no Italian at that stage. Yuri was to translate for him at the maestro's villa on the Via Cassia. Valery happened to be busy that day. He gave Yuri a vivid description of the person he was supposed to meet, but no name, oddly enough. The mutual surprise of both Yuri and Platon when they recognized each other at Rome's Termini station can only be imagined. They duly went out to the home of Maestro Tito Gobbi. Soon after our first rehearsals, we were invited to perform at the home of the Countess Alice di Robilon, who lived across the road from the Spanish Steps. The Countess had fled Russia in the late 1920s and later joined the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, an offshoot of the original Ballet Russe created by Sergei Diaghilev. She married a Venetian count and settled in Rome, spending the latter part of her life in the same palazzo, which was also one of the homes of Valli Toscanini, daughter of the famed conductor. The evening loomed large, and I was petrified at the prospect of accompanying Platon at a soirée of this nature, before a small but select audience made up of aristocracy and cognoscenti. So far, I had very little experience accompanying singing. Twice I'd been asked to do so in New Zealand, and in both cases the sopranos whom I played for sang adequately, though not memorably. A couple of rehearsals leading to the performances, and that was it. I had trained to be a soloist, and I'd played some chamber music and concertos with orchestra, but my experience rehearsing and performing with fellow instrumentalists hadn't been particularly enlightening as far as general musicianship went. Now, accompanying a singer of such original intentions only emphasized the great enigma that had always eluded me, and that was, how does one really go about making the piano sing? Because I realized that my playing had to match the singing voice I was working with, I had to supply a kind of magic carpet on which the melody could float with ease, without my playing getting in the way, and then I had to match the timbre I was producing with the timbre of Platon's voice. Not just the volume, the soft and loud moments, not just keeping up with his fluctuating tempi, very difficult, but actually making my playing an integral part of the performance. To do that, I needed to make the piano sing in a more telling way than what I had been used to. I thought about the accompanists I'd heard playing alongside some of the eminent singers I was lucky enough to catch in recital. It seemed to me that discretion was the name of the game. Some people actually praised this kind of accompanying. He simply disappears when the singer comes in. But it was exactly that self-effacing attitude, that almost non-presence of the piano part, that had posed a question mark for me. I realized that accompanying could be more than that it could be a dovetailing of two voices, each supporting the other. Rather than the piano following, so to speak, it could be an equal voice as it set the atmosphere, created the character, and maintained all this throughout the sung part. Every good piano teacher will insist on the production of a singing tone. But what exactly does that mean? For a start, what if the pianist doesn't know how to sing? Secondly, even if they do, how do you translate that into keyboard terms? One approach is to let the phrases breathe, meaning that there should be an almost imperceptible pause between each phrase. Well, that's a start, although it can lead to music making that's static. But since many pianists have a tendency to rush headlong through the music, this breathing at least puts a brake on that. But then what? How does singing inside one's head, however adequately, help shape the pianistic phrase and then the overall structure of a piece? Many pianists achieve outstanding results instinctively. Josef Hoffmann admitted that he didn't really think about giving his performances structure, that somehow they just came together the way they did spontaneously. On the other hand, his contemporary, Sergei Rachmaninoff, thought a great deal about the climactic point of a piece of music and shaped his performances accordingly. Vladimir Horowitz listened avidly to the great bel canto exponents of the past, particularly to the baritone Mattia Battistini and the soprano Olimpia Boronat, and sought to imitate the singing line. We might say that Arthur Schnabel went one step further towards linking piano playing with recitar cantando by writing in words to some of the music he played. Each of these iconic performers achieved very different results, due more perhaps to their individual talents, which allowed them to make sounds that at times seemed to want to burst into musical speech. There's a plethora of recordings by these great interpreters to be found on YouTube. If you don't already know them, they're worth discovering. But there are eminent names, often nimble-fingered musicians, who gain success more because of an ability to play fast and loud, or else are blessed with qualities including intellectual conviction and an intensity born out of this. Many of them, too, admire the cantabile quality of others and exhort students to make the piano sing. Recently, I watched a masterclass on YouTube where an esteemed virtuoso was coaching a student in a saraband by Bach. "You have to make this music sing," said the maestro. "When in doubt about how to phrase, sing it aloud." This he proceeded to do to the sounds la, 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 and then he asked the student to sing it on his own. But both versions failed to convince, failed to make that vital connection. The maestro's singing was simply a string of notes that went up and down with no real musical shape, while the student's version was even less interesting. Little by little, the enigma concerning the translation of singing from the voice to the piano was to be unravelled. This would be a first step towards entering fully into the world of sung speech. But meantime, I had to get through that first public performance, accompanying unfamiliar music in a completely unfamiliar way. Quite frankly, I don't remember all the items we performed that evening. One was definitely Rachmaninoff's Here All Is Well, a misnomer for me right then, if ever there was one. All was definitely not well yet. I do remember that we performed Macbeth's aria Pietà rispetto amore by Verdi. There were other Italian arias, this being the repertoire closest to Platon's heart. Handel's lyrical Dove sei and virtuoso Del minacciar del vento from the opera Ottone were definitely on the program. So was the art song Don Juan's Serenade by Tchaikovsky. Platon was an immediate success. His unique qualities, not just his very individual timbre, but his intelligence, generous spirit, and culture shone through, and his exotic features did the rest. In 1978, Russians were a rarity in the West. Soon offers for more concerts were to come our way, which for me meant buckling down and coming to grips with a whole new world.